be of service from groundbreaking to completion. And don't forget they accept all major credit cards. They even have free seamless gutters with every complete roof installation. Don't hesitate to call J&K Contracting at 740-698-3521 for a free estimate.
It's time for the latest local, regional, and national sports topics of the day. It's the Sports Fan, presented by J&K Contracting.
Ready? Break!
Now, from the WATH studios, here's Ethan Sargeant.
Good evening, Southeast Ohio, and welcome to the Sports Fan on this Thursday, September 7th, 2023. Gorgeous day in Athens. 75 degrees, sunny. I actually say it probably got up into the 80s right about now. It is picture perfect outside. Thankfully, we're avoiding those heat waves that are taking over the East Coast. Thank God it's not that hot. But I got a special guest in the studio here today. We are joined by the one, the only Mr. Darayus Sethna. Darayus, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Ethan. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks to everyone tuning in this evening. So happy to have you on board. Football season, NFL, finally starts today. I've been waiting for this day for maybe 5 months.
I think that a lot of people are right there with you, Darayus. Let's not waste any more time. We're going to talk about It's going to be a lot of football today on the show. If you're a football fan, you're going to enjoy today's Sports Fan because we have a lot to talk about. Of course, tomorrow, Football Friday kickoff, I'll be right over in our other studio, WXTQ, to take you through all of our games. Carl Blaylock and Cedric Granger will both have their own specific calls. Cedric Granger will be right here in WATH with Matt Frazee for Athens take on Alexander. And Carl Blaylock and Jacob Mata will be out in Bookdale for Nelsonville, York, River Valley Hall of Fame night over there. It'll be a fun one for the Buckeyes. But let's keep going up. We got OU football to go over as well. They take on FAU Saturday at 6. Russ will have the call, I believe, right here on WATH. I will be a great one as well. But let's talk about the biggest boys of them all. That is the NFL. One of the greatest spectacles in all of sport is finally back today. And before we get into the matchups over the weekend, let's talk about tonight's game. Lions taking on the Chiefs. Detroit have a big hype train behind them, Darayus. They made some moves in the offseason. Probably the most anticipated Detroit Lions season in a very long time. Dan Campbell, he's the leader of men. He's done a good job as their head coach. He's a early favorite for Coach of the Year, I'd say, if the Lions hit these lofty expectations. But then you've got the empire of the NFL right now, the Kansas City Chiefs, Super Bowl champions once again last year, and they're looking to repeat, become the first repeat champion since the Patriots way back in the early 2000s. So the big news coming out, Darayus, is that no Travis Kelce tonight for the Kansas City Chiefs. That news just came out about 15 minutes ago. Kelce is a no-go. He was basically a game-time decision, and as we're about just over 2 hours from kickoff over at Arrowhead Stadium, he is a no-go. So that's a big loss for the Chiefs. But what do you see happening in tonight's game, Darayus?
Well, I definitely think it's going to be a competitive showdown for sure. I mean, what's great about Week 1 football in the NFL is that everybody's fresh, everybody has their game plan, everyone's going to be locked in and ready to go. And that's going to be no different tonight. I look at the Detroit Lions, as you mentioned, Ethan, huge hype train. When you have acquisitions like Cam Sutton, David Montgomery at the running back position, and then how about Jared Goff and the improvement he made throughout the course of last season? Finished the year with completing 65% of his passes, 29 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and how about this? 14 touchdowns in the last 7 games of the Lions' regular season, even though they weren't able to make the playoffs. I really can't remember a team that didn't make the playoffs but has had so much hype around them in the offseason as the Detroit Lions.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that win that they got against the Packers on Sunday Night Football, even though they were already out of it at that point, Seattle had won their game, meaning that the Lions were done. They were eliminated from playoff contention, and their only reason to play that game was basically for Seattle, because I believe if Green Bay won, they were going to sneak into the playoffs.
Right. Yep.
So, it was an impressive performance on the road at Lambeau Field, which is not something we're used to saying about Detroit. We're used to Green Bay kind of just waltzing over Detroit, and they showed a lot of fight, a lot of grit, a lot of effort, and it was something that, again, like we're saying, it's not something we're used to seeing from the Lions.
Yeah, but looking on the other side of it, Ethan, when you have Patrick Mahomes, who is undoubtedly the best quarterback in the NFL. You can tell me about Joe Burrow. You can tell me about Trevor Lawrence, Aaron Rodgers, all these guys. It starts and stops with Patrick Mahomes.
I have to agree. I think that, honestly, when you say that, and I think that we have a lot of Bengals fans listening, and I love Joe Burrow just as much as the next guy. We'll talk about him in just a few minutes. But Patrick Mahomes, pound for pound, is the best quarterback in football, and I think it's a pretty hard argument to go against that.
I mean, the guy had 41 touchdowns last year. 41.
And it's not even close to his best season.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, and then Travis Kelce will be out. 46 career passing touchdowns for Patrick Mahomes to Travis Kelce. He's obviously the biggest target for Mahomes, so it's going to be a great challenge for some of these younger guys on the Chiefs to really step up in opening week, and I think this will be a great way for Andy Reid to really see what his offense can do without their number one target. So a lot of question marks for both teams coming into this game, and one team is going to answer more questions than the other after tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun.
It's either a statement victory from the Detroit Lions if they can pull it off on the road, or it's a business as usual from Kansas City. Another thing we haven't mentioned, Chris Jones also out tonight for Kansas City, their star defensive tackle, still holding out, waiting for a contract. Before we get into my next point, the lines for tonight, Detroit are currently plus 4.5. The over-under is 52. We'll get into our hot picks at the end of the show. But speaking of somebody else who's expecting a contract pretty soon, a guy from this area is going to be a lot richer in a couple of days. Joe Burrow is expected to sign a new deal here very shortly. There have been a lot of rumors over the last couple of days that both sides are pushing to get a deal done before week 1. It does appear that when that deal does go through, it will make Joe Burrow the highest paid quarterback in the National Football League. And as he prepares for your Cleveland Browns, Darayus, what do you think about Joe Burrow as a quarterback, and in terms of what you see out of somebody who's about to be paid like a top-end quarterback?
Well, I just think it's amazing for the Cincinnati Bengals to, probably since Boomer Esiason, to have that guy who is your franchise quarterback.
Carson was there for a little bit, but that injury in 2005 really just took Carson Palmer,
when
just
you think,
dropped his level.
Competing for a Super Bowl, Cincinnati Bengals, Boomer Esiason was the last guy before Joe Burrow.
Yeah,
and now to see Joe Burrow, the way he has completely changed this franchise in the last 2 years. And like you said, I'm a Cleveland Browns fan, so this is a divisional rival, not a Bengals fan whatsoever. But just what he has done with Jamar Chase, with T. Higgins, with Tyler Boyd, he has the best receiving core in the National Football League and has taken complete advantage of it. If I didn't pick the Chiefs to be the number one seed in the AFC, I would pick the Cincinnati Bengals. I think the Cincinnati Bengals are the second best team in the AFC, but the challenge is, once you do pay Joe Burrow all that money, you're going to have to figure out what are you going to do with Jamar Chase,
Absolutely.
T. Higgins. So this core might not be together for that much longer. So they've really got to take advantage of this time now.
You bring up a hugely important point, because the Bengals, with the way they have their cap set up right now, there is a lot of cap available, but again, a lot of that cap is going to go into Joe Burrow. It already has gone into guys like they really solidified their linebacking core with Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt. And now, the T. Higgins question is going to loom a lot, especially as we head into the offseason. T. Higgins will almost certainly be, if they don't re-sign him, a prime franchise tag candidate. And again, the questions will just continue to swirl regarding that. And I know that the Bengals, they'll want nothing more than to keep this core together because, look, it's working.
Exactly.
And I think that we're going to see. I think that there's a lot that still has to happen. I think the first domino that has to fall is this extension, which it remains to be seen if it will be done before Sunday. That will make Joe Burrow the most highly paid player in the National Football League. We'll see, because that's the first domino, and once you get those numbers in, you can start to crunch the other numbers of what you can do from a cap standpoint. Let's talk about this Sunday's game. Bengals taking on the Browns, the Battle of Ohio in Week 1. It's a team that have had Joe Burrow's number over the past few years. Joe Burrow finally got his first win over the Browns in last season's December matchup, in the second matchup of the year. It was a 1-1 split last year. Browns took care of the Bengals on Monday Night Football. I had the misfortune misfortune of being at that game, and that was not very fun as a Bengals fan.
Yeah, it must have been cold, and it must have been a cold and miserable Halloween for you last year.
It really was. I mean, the only real highlight was that nice T. Higgins catch. That was about it. But, they did bounce back very well in that second game. They played well. They did a good job of limiting Deshaun Watson, not allowing him to control a game like Deshaun can. And I think that's the big question I have for you as a Browns fan, because I think it's the big question around the Browns this year. There's a lot of talent in a lot of spots. It's a good roster from top to bottom, but it all starts and ends with number 4. What do you think about Deshaun Watson?
I think we're definitely going to see a much better Deshaun Watson this year. I mean, for very obvious reasons, right? He'll be there for a whole season. He'll be there for a whole offseason. So he's had the time to talk with Kevin Stefanski, to talk with Alex Van Pelt, the offensive coordinator, to get a sense of how this offense is going to work. And, if all else fails, the Cleveland Browns need to realize that they have arguably one of the top 3 best running backs in football with Nick Chubb. I don't want to hear any more excuses about we can't get the passing game going, because you need to rely on Nick Chubb more. The Browns are in a very interesting spot in terms of the fact that they're okay with paying Nick Chubb the money that he is earning, right? And, with other franchises and their running backs, that's not the case. And then looking on the defensive side for the Browns, starts and stops with this guy, Myles Garrett. 60 combined tackles last year, 16 sacks as well for Myles.
He's a pretty good football player, I think.
Yeah, I would say he wasn't, number 1 pick for nothing, to be fair. But yeah, I think Myles Garrett, even though Jadeveon Clowney is not there, I really like this Browns secondary with Denzel Ward. Martin Emerson has really stepped up. I think he's going to be cornerback number 2 for this team. So, and of course, Jim Schwartz is a huge upgrade. I think he's going to this is going to be a much more disciplined team, less penalties. So your guy Joe Burrow is going to have his work cut out for him.
I really like that you brought up Jim Schwartz, because I've talked about it a couple times on the SportsFan about how the Browns defense, the main struggle last year was having Joe Woods and a guy that kind of, it almost seemed like Joe Woods was in over his head. There were many issues, like you said, undisciplined, a lot of silly penalties, silly mistakes that ended up costing the Browns football game. Look no further than week 2 last year.
Yeah.
But, when you think about the Browns as a whole, and you listed off a lot of guys on that defense that are very good. We didn't even mention Darayus Smith, which was a big signing. Ogbo Okoronkwo coming off the edge is another. They're stacked up front. Dalvin Tomlinson, in the secondary is very solid too. Greg Newsome is there. Juan Thornhill is there. It's a talented defense, and it's why a lot of that didn't make sense that they were letting up as much as they were letting up, because it has the players there. It's not making sense. Players are real good, but they're giving up 30 a game. This shouldn't be happening, and I think that Jim Schwartz is really going to shore that up. But again, I think the big question, I think there's 2 big questions for the Browns defense, or excuse me, 2 big questions for the Browns as a whole. The Browns defense, can you keep the ball in front of you? The big thing with Joe Burrow and this Bengals offense is they're going to try and beat you over the top.
Yeah.
With Jamar Chase, with T. Higgins, with Tyler Boyd, with new signing Irv Smith Jr. They're going to come underneath and they're going to try to suck you in as a defense, and then they're going to try and beat you over the top, and they're going to use the speed and the athleticism of Chase and Higgins to get that deep bomb. Can the Browns keep that in front of them? Can they limit Joe Mixon in the run game? And on the defensive side, can they just keep the Bengals to short gains? That's going to be their biggest play. I think on the other side for the offense, it's going to come down. You mentioned Nick Chubb. I think the big thing for them is they're going to have to win that battle in the trenches, because the Bengals D-line, no slouch. DJ Reader has been fantastic for that football team, and he's in a contract year. He's going to step up. You got B.J. Hill in there. You got Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard off the edge. That's a really good defensive line that can compete with anybody's in football. And, Nick Chubb is really good. The Browns' offensive line is still very good. A lot of great pieces there as well. I think that's going to be a fascinating battle up front.
And the Browns are going to, as much as we talk about Nick Chubb, they're going to have to make plays from the air as well. Deshaun Watson's going to have to come up with big-time throws, whether it's to Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, or even David Njoku, who had a very strong year last year despite the losing record. And ultimately, it starts and stops with Deshaun Watson. This is going to be, I think, a really interesting game. Again, week 1, so pretty much everyone's healthy. Divisional game. The Browns, schedule is tough to start out the gate. Even the Bengals, I believe they have some divisional games early. The
Yeah,
Browns, 3 of their first 4 games are divisional games.
Yeah, Bengals, 2 of the first 4 are divisional. They host Baltimore next week, and what should be a really fun and a very important football game super early in the year. Again, last year the Bengals started 0-2, but they lost that wacky game to the Steelers at home and then went on the road to Dallas. But I think the biggest difference between that year and this year is while Joe Burrow's had the concern with his calf, he's been lifting, he's been working, he's been in the facility. Last year with the appendix, lost 15 pounds, wasn't the same guy for a couple weeks, and he had to build himself back up, and then we saw the Burrow we all know.
And he's got that new hairstyle this year, too, so, hey, the new Joe might be good for the Bengals.
Yeah, well, that's a good segue into something I wanted to talk about here in the Sports Fan, because we're going to try and do this on a Thursday on a pretty consistent basis. We're going to have an AFC North roundtable show. Darayus will be a regular guest representing his Cleveland Browns. I'll be here usually hosting, but of course, repping my Cincinnati Bengals, and then we should hopefully have 2 more guests most weeks. Both of these guys are caught up in some other things right now, so they couldn't make it today, but they will be guests in the future. We're going to have Cedric Granger, voice of the Bulldogs, representing his Baltimore Ravens, and then my co-host over on Football Friday Kickoff, Max Brunke, representing his Pittsburgh Steelers. And let's talk about those games this weekend. Let's start with the Steelers because they have a real fun matchup taking on the San Francisco 49ers. A lot of questions in San Francisco regarding the quarterback position. Brock Purdy with the elbow injury. They traded Trey Lance. Sam Darnold is in there to back up now. But it's a very, very talented roster. They just signed Nick Bosa to a big money extension, 5 years, $170 million. Can the Steelers keep up with this 49ers team?
Absolutely, especially because it's week 1. I think the Steelers were a team that really impressed me throughout the offseason, just in terms of their consistency with things. When you have a guy like Mike Tomlin at the helm who's been doing this since I was in kindergarten, absolute 100% trust goes to him. And I think the fact that the Steelers, they have the weapons to get it done. And I don't think people are saying that enough. You've got Pat Freiermuth at your tight end. You have George Pickens, who could very well become the next Odell Beckham Jr. You have Deontay Johnson is still there. So you have a quality receiving core. And then you can definitely tell that the Steelers prioritized upgrading that offensive line. Drafting Broderick Jones, Nick Herbig, I believe is his name.
No, you're right.
Also,
Wisconsin product. They love their Wisconsin products.
Exactly.
There. Of course, you got TJ Watt as well.
Yeah. And then obviously that defense. When you think about Pittsburgh, you think about defense. And you got TJ Watt, Cam Hayward is still there. That secondary, I think, is maybe a little shaky for me, especially with the law. But they did get Patrick Peterson, losing Cam Sutton. Minkah Fitzpatrick is there, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think that Minka's going to have to do a lot of legwork in that secondary. I agree with you. I think if there's a weak point in that Steeler team, it is that secondary. I think that, the offense, I think it will move at a pace where, I think Pickett's going to have to settle into things a little bit, but I think Pickett is a long-term solution for the Steelers at quarterback. It's just going to be about getting him into a rhythm, getting him online with guys like Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, and Pat Freiermuth as well, their tight end.
Najee Harris. I think Najee Harris is going to have a breakout year, especially now that he has a line that I think can do a much better job run blocking.
He had a great rookie year. It was a little bit more down last year. The yards per carry just weren't there because that Steeler O-line, as you mentioned, struggled, and they did a lot this offseason. They got a guy like Isaac Simuolo from the Eagles, who had the best offensive line of football last year. They picked up Broderick Jones, as you mentioned, in the draft. So, in theory, this is going to be an improved Steelers team. I don't think they're going to have to win 7 of their last 8 games down the stretch to get to 500 this year, because that's the boat they were in last year. I do think they're going to be competing for a playoff spot. Honestly, I think all 4 teams in the AFC North are going to be right there when it comes playoff time. I think that we're going to be talking about, maybe 2 teams fighting for the division and 2 teams fighting for, wild card spots. Mm-hmm. And who knows, maybe all 4 teams make it in. I think it's a distinct possibility.
It's one of the most intriguing divisions in the whole NFL this year.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Let's talk about the last team in that division, the Baltimore Ravens, they take on the Houston Texans. Houston, new head coach and DeMeco Ryans, new quarterback and C.J. Stroud. It's a retooled roster. There are a lot more positive signs Houston this year than there were last year. But again, this is a game that Baltimore is expected to win. However, a little bit of rough news for Baltimore today. Odell Beckham Jr. popping up on the injury report with a limited designation with a toe injury. So that is something to look out for to see if Odell plays in his Ravens debut week 1 or if they sit him. Of course, a huge game coming up next week, as we mentioned, against Cincinnati. What do you like about Baltimore coming into the season?
Well, here's my thing about Baltimore. Obviously, I'm happy that they got that deal done with Lamar Jackson, one of the most electrifying quarterbacks in the game. But if you had to ask me who's finishing last in this division today, I would probably pick the Baltimore Ravens. Yeah. To me, there are just a lot of question marks surrounding the long-term health of Lamar, and as you mentioned, Odell with an injury. And I think also the reliance on Mark Andrews. He had 847 receiving yards last season. The next closest Raven with that number was Demarcus Robinson with 458. So you've got, 400 yards and drop off there?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the addition of Odell, when healthy, can really pay off. I don't know what Zay Flowers is going to be able to do. I think all signs turn to that he's going to be a very good wide receiver in this league. But, there's always that doubt going into week 1. So to me, and I could be completely wrong, the Ravens might go on and win this whole division. But to me, the Ravens just have the most question marks in terms of just talent and health. But yeah. They should be an easy win with or without Odell against the Texans this Sunday.
Yeah, I think the big question is, can Lamar Jackson stay healthy? It's been the question that's followed him throughout his whole NFL career. The last 2 years, Baltimore have been in a place that they could have won the division. Instead, Cincinnati comes up and takes it from them because Lamar gets hurt. So, it'll be interesting to see if Baltimore can get off the ground running this year and keep it running, and hopefully Lamar can stay healthy, because like you said, I think this division is going to be absolutely electric. Last thing before we take a quick break, what's another NFL game you've just got on your personal watch list this weekend that you're expecting to be a barn burner?
Man, I'm looking at the schedule right now. That 49ers-Steelers game I think is going to be really good. But how about Bills-Jets for Monday Night Football at MetLife Stadium? Bills Mafia is going to show up in force. But how about those Jets fans? These rejuvenated Jets fans. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a fantastic atmosphere. It's going to be a drama before the game even kicks off. I am so excited to watch this on ESPN and ABC. Couldn't ask for a better start to Monday Night Football than Bills-Jets at MetLife Stadium.
That game is going to be awesome. I'm very much looking forward to that. When I look across the schedule, there's a lot of very interesting games. I'm looking at two teams in the AFC that are competing, and that is the Dolphins and the Chargers.
Yes.
4:25 on Sunday. I can't believe this isn't the national game. It's the national game is
Cowboys-Giants on Sunday.
That's 8:20. The national game is Eagles-Patriots.
Yeah.
On CBS. I can't believe this is a national game, because these are two teams that have Super Bowl aspirations this year, and the Chargers and the Dolphins. Of course, the Dolphins losing Jalen Ramsey to injury, it hurts right now, but they should be getting him back at some point in the year. There's a ton of talent all over that roster. They have constructed a team that is fully capable of competing for a Super Bowl. It remains to be seen if they'll be able to do that. And of course, the same goes for LA. I think that this is the year for Brandon Staley. If he doesn't get it right this year, bye-bye, you're gone.
I was surprised that he stayed after blowing that, 27-0 lead against Jacksonville.
Well, the offensive coordinator, Lombardi, is gone, replaced by Kellen Moore from the Cowboys, which is going to be really interesting to see how he implements his offense into Justin Herbert. They still got Keenan Allen. They were able to reshuffle the cap to keep him. Mike Williams is still there. They got Quentin Johnston, who they drafted. Austin Eckler stuck around after some trade rumors with him as well. So, it's a good team, and these are two really good teams. I think it's going to be a great benchmark.
Yeah, for sure. You couldn't ask for a better slate of games week 1.